I've seen better, but these are pretty good.
I'm going down. I'm gonna build my first quilt out of a different type of material. I'd never made a quilt before, but I have worked with wood, so I'm gonna take you on this journey with me to pick out some wood today. I picked out all of my fabric. Got some mahogany, some black walnut. They sell this type of fabric by the board foot, which is 12-inch piece by 12-inch piece by 1 inch thick, and they calculate how much that is and sell it that way.
Hey everyone, I'm back in the shop. Thanks for all your kind words on my last video, and for those that are not members of the exclusive club, I did post a video on there making some end grain cutting boards. I'm gonna make another board that's a little more intricate and requires a little more types of cutting, so I will be filming some of that. We're gonna start out just with a little bit of an explanation. Most cutting boards are made by taking a piece of lumber and cutting it into a cutting board this direction. You can also take strips of each of these colors and glue them together, make a cutting board. To get a true cutting board, you want your end grain. You want this end of the wood because the end grain is open, so it's easier on your knives. It doesn't scratch as much, doesn't wear as much. They find big cutting blocks, butcher blocks that are hundreds of years old all the time. So we're gonna put this together, but we're gonna put this in a pattern, sort of like the way you put your quilts together. We'll be cutting these pieces, putting them together, cutting them, flipping them. This is a surface planer. I got to make sure that every one of these boards are exactly the same thickness. Now you'd think that when you go to the store and buy this, that all be the same, but these are an 1/8 inch difference from each other. And that would be way too much for the pattern that I'm doing. So I'm gonna make all these boards the same thickness. And then I'll be taking them over to a different planer, and then I'll make sure that this side is exact 90 degrees to this side. They'll be exactly the same shapes, and the shapes will line up together. So we'll get started on getting these planed. All right, I ran these all through like 3 times, or take just a little bit off at a time so it doesn't break the wood apart. And each time after I ran them, I kept running my calipers on it to make sure that they're down to exactly the same. So now all these boards are exactly the same thickness. The next problem is this surface may not be at a 90 degree to this surface. So I'll take it back over to a different planer, cut the edges on them so they're at a perfect 90 to the front. And I'll know that every one of those pieces are parallel to each other this way and 90 to each other this way. I don't know if you guys will be able to see this, but now that those are perfectly flat and square with each other, this side is just razor sharp because it is such a perfect square, and this black walnut just really, it's so hard that it makes almost a cutting edge on the edge of the board. This is black walnut, this is cherry, and this is maple. You can see the 3 different colors, and that will help make the pattern when we cut them and flip them on their ends. The other thing that I didn't mention is how this machine works. This has a cutting head that spins super fast. And this side of the table, it's a little bit lower than this table, so when you push it through, it just cuts a little tiny bit off of the high spots until it cuts all the way through at the same time. Great investment if you are going to be making cutting boards or a lot of cabinetry that requires just perfect 90s to get started with. Got to set up a station, move the camera, and I'll show you how we glue these together. All right, I've got my gluing station set up to start gluing these boards together. I've paired all these boards into pairs. I've got my maple and my cherry, and my maple and my walnut, and I've got my cherry and my walnut. So I've just trued them up, cut them to length on my rotary cutter or my chop saw, and now I'm going to do my first sew up of them together. I'm also going to offset the boards just a little bit when I'm gluing them. because I'm gonna cut them on an angle. So I don't wanna waste that little piece because I'm gonna cut it off. Don't think I'm just not lining things up. I'm actually doing it on purpose. I've got my glue out and I put all my glue on with rollers because there's just such a lot of surface area. So we'll get started with some glue. I have to buy my glue by the gallon because I'm a big believer in glue. This glue actually becomes stronger than the wood. If you hook those up to something to break them apart, it would break the wood away from the glue, but the glue wouldn't break. Some guys glue just one side of their joints. I like to glue both sides just in case you got a spot that's a little thin on one. Glue's cheap, but if you got halfway through this board and you had a delamination in the middle of your project, it'd be impossible to fix. Probably be the equivalent of unpicking one of your quilts that you made a mistake on and you're long arming them, but it would be right in the middle of the board and you wouldn't be able to get to it. It'd be right in the center of it. You can't just all of a sudden take a little bit of the glue out. And I've got several of these to glue up, so I'm going to just set them up and then stack them up and glue them together. And there is a lot of parallels in quilting because you guys are basically cutting fabric into pieces and arranging them in a particular order. Cutting boards, and with a lot of projects that you do with wood, you're doing the same thing. You're just cutting them, making sure everything is perfectly the same, making sure that all your points line up. And you'll see that that's even more relevant as this project moves along because there's many points that have to be lined up in order to make the pattern look like the pattern when it's done. I'm gonna grab a few clamps. I'm gonna start clamping these together, tightening them down. And they shouldn't glue to each other, just the pairs that I've got glued should stay together and the rest of them should break apart. Be able to get them clamped down here good and tight. You can see the glue squeezing out between them. All right, so I'll take this now and set it off to the side so I can start on my next one. And I'll go through that same order 3 more times, get them all glued up, and then leave them for the night. I like to leave them about at least 12 hours to dry up and get solidified. Then I'll come back and we'll fire up the camera again and I'll go to the next step, show you what we're doing next. Morning, everybody. Glued these up last night. They've been sitting all night long. I came here this morning. I've already undone a few of them, but it's a lot easier to unclamp than it is to clamp. You don't have to line everything up as you're going. What I've done here is glued up all these in matching one of each. I'm basically sewing 2 strips together so that I can then cut it into a pattern. There will be 2 different cuts on these. We're gonna cut these into triangles that are 60 degrees on each angle, which is an isosceles triangle. We'll set up our saw and we'll go over there and start cutting those down. All right, we're gonna get the table rotary cutter set up. I have a electronic angle finder so that I can get it exactly to 30 degrees. Right there, perfectly. So I'm gonna take each of these boards and I'm going to rip them with this angle on it. You can't hold them while you're cutting them because they're too small. So I've got to create a couple of jigs to make this work. I'll film a little bit of me cutting one angle on each one of the boards or a couple of the boards, and then I'll come back after we put the jig on and I'll show you how we're gonna cut them into actual triangles. So it cuts a nice clean piece, but you can see how the pattern can start to emerge. I'll cut all of these with one side on it, then I'll set up a jig and we'll cut a couple to show you how I get an exact triangle out of it. We'll go until we get to there. All right, I brought these over to my rotary cutter and the ends aren't perfectly square or perfectly, I don't know if you can see that. I'm gonna true those all up so I stay with a nice clean crisp edge on the ends. And then you'll see after we cut them too, I have to number all these. It makes it a little easier to ride on them. one piece of maple right there. That's hard maple, and it definitely lives up to its name. All right, got perfectly clean boards and square, so we'll go over to the table saw and cut them into triangles. I had to build a platform to do this. The problem is, if I cut this with this on this side of the blade like it's supposed to be, my fence, when I cut one off, it would be trapped in there. The triangle would be trapped in there and it would tear it up. And so I had to build this to where I can get them away from it. I'm gonna run through one of these and then I'll show you kind of what they look like after I do that. Okay, I have now taken all these triangles and put them in an order. I guess this would be the equivalent of putting your rows together when you're quilting, and I'll be sewing them all together with glue. From there, I'll be able to cut them actually into rows and create the pattern. So I will move now to the glue up station and glue these up. Okay, that gets all the glue on them. These are called columns. I'm gonna put these on the boards before I start clamping them. Slightly snug these down to line them up, and then I'll start putting clamps on. That's about it. Put all the clamps on and then we'll move on to the next stage. Went ahead and clamped up. There's 2 boards in here and I put all the clamps on. Same with this small one here. I put the 2 smaller boards in here and clamp them up, and they'll be waiting to dry until tomorrow. And then we'll come back and clean these up, and then I'll be cutting these into rows and starting to build the pattern. And it will be, hopefully it'll all match up when it gets done, because one board has to be cut and the other one has to be cut, and then they have to be combined in order to get the pattern to be what it's supposed to be at the end. So we'll see you tomorrow. All right, I'm back this morning. Gonna go ahead and unhook all of these clamps and the cauls that I put on there, and then I'm gonna show you what they look like on this next setup. So we'll get a kind of a look at it right now. It still won't be very clear, but as soon as I get these off, I'll try to show you the end. And then I'll take these back over to the planer and the sander and true them up again. I have 2 big ones and 2 small ones, but actually each one of them is a pattern that has to go with each other in order to make the pattern throughout the whole board. So we'll go ahead and pull these off, and then I'll let you take a look at it. This is actually 2 boards. They kind of stuck together. But as you can see, I numbered these 1 through 6 and then 1 through 6 again. And then this one is numbered 4 and it's offset. So I don't know if you'll be able to see this. I'll see if I can get it lined up. When I cut this and flip them over and sew them together in their rows, it'll create a pattern on the top of the board. So we'll go ahead and clean all the glue off of these, run them over to the planer and sander, and then I'll turn the camera back on when I start cutting these into their individual rows to put into the blocks. All right, we're at the table saw. This is a lot like when you guys take your pieces finally and you take them over and straight edge them and run your rotary cutter down and cut them into the exact sizes. That's what we're gonna be doing here on the table saw. I'm gonna rip these into 1¼ inch strips, and I'll try to show you what the pattern's gonna look like. It's hard to tell until the whole thing's put together. But we'll get this fired up and get some cutting going on. Now that I've cut all these blocks up into their individual rows, this would be the equivalent of you guys, when you get your rolls, you start sewing them together. Hopefully you'll be able to see the pattern in it emerge. So we'll first start just lining them up, 1 of each. And you might be able to see that afraid if I talk at the same time, I'll get messed up. And then to see the pattern, we have to then flip them this way. You can see that pattern's starting to emerge. It's a little hard to see when the lumber's still rough and isn't as glossy. As you can see, it now has a pattern with blocks. It's called the double block. And then I will put all the boards together and throw them back onto the clamps and clamp them up one more time. And then this will be the end grain. So this is really hard now. So really the only way that I can take out any imperfections on this next glue up is with sanding, because if you try to use a planer on this, it'll just tear it apart. It's actually dangerous. I don't ever use a planer on end grain. I'll go ahead and take the camera and show a little bit of a close-up, and then I will build the rest of the boards and get them glued up, and we'll move on to the next phase. All right, we've got them all out of the clamps after gluing and on their final glue up, and you can see the pattern is starting to come out on them a little bit. I'll run these through the sander, the surface sander, like 30 times to take off. It takes off like hundredths of an inch at a time until it gets perfectly flat. And after that, we'll then trim up the edges that aren't exactly aligned, and then we'll show you over on the palm sander when I get done with this sanding. All right, I've ran these all through the surface planer, got them all flat, and then I took them to the table saw and cut the edges square. And now I'm gonna put a little bit of a round edge along the edges with the router, just on the top surface. So I've picked out the cleanest side, and I mean, they're all clean, but sometimes you'll have a little knot in or something, so you need to make sure that everything's on the best side. I'll go ahead and route these two. And then from there, I'll take it over to hand sand, and I'll explain that on the next part of it. Okay. Nice quarter round off the edge so we can sand that up and finish it perfectly smooth. So we'll move on to the sanding table and we'll give you a demonstration on that. We're going to be sanding these, and we'll start with 80 grit. That's how many pieces of sand are on your sandpaper per square inch, I think. Is that what they come up with that? And we'll sand 80 grit, and then we'll move to 120, and then to 180, and then to 220, 280, 300, then 400. This wood is so hard it will just polish it. So I'll show you how to do one of these, or what I do on one of these. I just got a new sander, and I don't know if they have the same saying in the quilting world, but we have a saying, buy once, cry once. Because good tools cost a lot of money, but once you buy them, you'll never have to buy them again. And I invested in a new sander to do some of these boards because of all the sanding. I'll probably be maybe 3 hours sanding 4 boards down. So from there, we'll move over to oiling. Morning guys, got done sanding last night and left them to just sit for the night, and I'm coming back today and filming the last part of oiling it. This is actually my favorite part because it really makes the pattern stand out. And so we'll put some butcher block oil on these, and then they'll sit for another 24 hours, and then I'll beeswax them and put a really high buff on them. We'll go ahead and get started and dump the cutting oil right on the board, and you'll start to see the pattern just emerge. See the color is changing, and this is the natural wood color. And these will forever stay shiny as long as you just keep them waxed once they're finished, or add a little oil to them, because this is the natural color of the black walnut and the cherry and the maple. That's just their natural color. So even if, for example, if you use this for years as a cutting board and it started to wear down and break down and scratch up, it's literally all you'd have to do is sand it back down and sand the scratches out, and it would be just exactly like this again. You know, in woodworking, and I'm sure it's the same with quilting, you know every single piece of wood, you know every single piece of fabric that you've put in that thing, and you know where, unfortunately, you also know where every little tiny mistake is. I'm not a professional, I'm just a backyard hobbyist. I'm gonna give them to the kids to auction off. I think it's March the 8th. I'm gonna have them auction these off, and we're gonna use the money and put it in the blessing bundles. I wouldn't say these are absolutely perfect, just like with a quilt. They are beautiful and they're made with love, and I think that's what quilts are too. So if you'd like to get one of these, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, I did post one, or the kids posted one on their exclusive club of a previous board that they auctioned off. So now you can see the pattern and the 3D illusion effect of the board.
What's up, guys? Depending on what angle you're looking at, this changes what it looks like.
Yeah. And are the blocks sticking up or going in?
To me, they are standing up.
I'm not a professional woodworker, so
sure.
Some of these don't actually
There's a couple that don't
meet
quite
perfectly, but a lot of the comments that on the other one was like, we don't talk about points not matching.
Yeah.
Our points. We don't.
All right, I'm getting out of here. See you guys.
All right, I'm going to finish these up, and thanks for joining me at the shop. I hope that you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.